The biting cold morning of late October 2025 in Nebraska began with something that didn't belong to the usual peace of Grand Island. Four unmarked police cars turned into the West Shady Lane neighborhood and quietly braked in front of a single-story white house everyone knew, the home of a silver-haired gentleman who could still be seen watering his lawn every Sunday morning. Neighbors stood behind their curtains, holding their breath as officers in bulletproof vests spread out and surrounded the yard like they were preparing for a major operation, not a case that had been dormant for nearly 40 years. Inside, 68-year-old Mark Harwood was brewing his morning coffee, a habit he'd never broken in half a lifetime. A former warehouse worker, a widower the community saw as kind, a man who had never caused trouble, never once had his name called by the police. But at 6:42 a.m., a sharp knock cut through the steam rising from the pot. "Mr. Harwood, Nebraska State Police, we have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the 1985 disappearance of Linda Harwood." One officer later recalled, "He set the coffee cup down very gently, but his hand shook just enough for you to know he knew this day was coming." October 22, 1985, St. Francis Hospital, 9 p.m., Linda Harwood, 33 years old, night shift nurse, left the hospital, hugging her coat tight against the cold wind blowing in from the cornfields. She walked to her Pontiac Bonneville, drove into the thick fog, and vanished. The next morning, the car was found on the bank of the Platte River, door ajar, belongings untouched, no signs of struggle, no witnesses, a woman who simply dissolved into thin air. For nearly 4 decades, the perpetrator, or the person who knew the truth, lived free in Nebraska, attended church on Sundays, helped with community fundraisers, chatted with people who still spoke of Linda with sorrow in their voices. How does an ordinary man become the center of Nebraska's most haunting missing person case? What made police reopen the investigation after 40 years? And most importantly, what piece of evidence, forgotten for decades, finally led them to his doorstep? Grand Island, Nebraska, late October 1985. It was the coldest time of the season, when the dry cornfields rustled in the night wind, and thick fog blanketed every suburban road like a thin white shroud. The scattered sodium streetlights cast tired, yellowish glows that stretched into trembling streaks on the wet pavement. It was the kind of Nebraska night locals always spoke about in hushed tones, that if you stood outside long enough, you'd hear the wind threading through the cornstalks like someone whispering. But that night was still completely ordinary for 33-year-old Linda Harwood, a nurse at St. Francis Hospital, who had just finished a long shift. She pushed open the heavy metal back door of the hospital. It made a small echo in the empty hallway. Linda hugged her coat closer, her breath mixing with the cold air into slow dissolving white puffs in the dense fog. Under the faint red glow of the hospital's rear lights, the few remaining co-workers waved goodbye. Their voices sounded broken and thin, as if swallowed by the vast damp cold around them. Linda smiled back, walking quickly but lightly, the way someone does when they're used to Nebraska's late fall nights. The parking lot was almost empty, just a few fog-damp cars sitting quietly in the dimness. It was so still that the sound of Linda opening her car door rang out unnaturally loud. She bent down, put her bag on the passenger seat, adjusted her coat, then slid into the light blue Pontiac Bonneville she'd been driving for 6 years. When she turned the key, the engine started softly but echoed, as if breaking the silence that covered the whole hospital area. The headlights came on, cutting 2 trembling white beams through the fog. The car slowly rolled out of the lot and melted into the hazy emptiness of the suburban road, heading south of Grand Island. No one standing there knew that the moment Linda's car disappeared behind the trees was the last time the town would ever see her. Hours later, the night dragged on like an endless ribbon. Linda hadn't come home. In the small house on Sycamore Street, the landline rang a few times, then stopped, each ring only making the silence deeper. Mark Harwood, her husband, paced the living room, glancing at the clock, then the window, trying to push away the growing unease. Maybe her shift ran late, maybe she stopped somewhere. She had never done that. But Grand Island had also never had fog this thick bad enough to make driving hard. Still, every passing minute started tightening around the house. 10 o'clock, then 11, then later. No call from Linda. No one at the hospital had seen her come back. Worry turned to dread, then to a hollow feeling he couldn't name. Mark threw on a coat and drove the routes Linda took every night. He swept the sidewalks with his headlights, stopped at familiar turns, as if looking a little harder would make her appear. But there was nothing but fog, darkness, and the wind whipping against the car. When he returned home, still without her, Mark stood in the front yard, hands trembling slightly as he picked up the phone. After a silence that felt endless, he dialed the Grand Island police and said in a hoarse, desperate voice, "My wife, she's missing." The Grand Island Police Department received Mark Harwood's call just before 1 a.m. in a quiet town like Grand Island in 1985. A nighttime missing person report always made the desk officer react faster than usual. The silence outside the command center windows, combined with the fog, now smothering the entire town, made every sound feel more dangerous. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars were dispatched, their red and blue lights sweeping across empty roads, carrying the first unanswered questions. An adult woman, driving home from work at night, only a few miles from home. How could she just disappear? No blizzard, no reported accident, no 911 witnesses. She simply didn't make it home. That was what bothered the police most. A quiet disappearance, with no warning. Half an hour later, the official search was activated. Sergeant Carl Myers immediately split the teams into 3 directions. Direction 1, the route from the hospital to the South Side residential area. Direction 2, the scattered neighborhoods along Sycamore, where the Harwoods lived. Direction 3, the area along the Platte River, a quiet spot many locals used to turn around or pull over for a break. They didn't expect to find anything too soon, but they searched anyway, step by step, as if something were waiting in the dark. Francis Hospital, the place that could confirm Linda's final movements. Officers checked the parking lot, noted where she left, questioned security, examined entrances and exits. Everything was normal, exactly as Mark had described over the phone. Linda had left the hospital, nothing suspicious there. The team searching the hospital to south route even swept the shoulders of the road with their headlights, looking for signs of an accident. But the pavement was clean. No skid marks, no broken glass, no indication the car had veered off her familiar path. The neighborhood search turned up nothing new either. A few porch lights were still on, but no one had seen Linda's light blue car pass after her shift ended. Most just shook their heads, saying the fog was so thick it was hard to tell one car from another. Every answer only added to the haze, but the team assigned to the Platte River area was the first to feel real unease. Patrol headlights swept across the dirt road, leading to a small pull-off by the river, a spot usually visited only by fishermen or couples wanting privacy. And there, fading into the thick fog, was a car, a light blue Pontiac Bonneville, Linda Harwood's car. The first officer stepped out, walking slowly, hand on his flashlight. The fog wrapped around the car, made it look like something abandoned long ago, even though it clearly hadn't been there long. Headlights off, no one inside, tires straight, not stuck in mud, meaning the car hadn't slid or tried to go into the river. And from the moment the officer opened the door, the feeling that something was wrong took hold. The driver's door was ajar, not wide open, but not fully closed either. A small detail, but strange in cold weather. People usually close the door tight to keep the heat in. Linda's purse sat neatly on the passenger seat, not ransacked. Wallet still there, papers untouched. Her portable phone, the big heavy kind from 1985, wasn't there, but Linda rarely carried it anyway. She hated the bulky thing. The keys were still in the ignition. That made the officers freeze for a few seconds. A sober adult never leaves a car with the keys in it. Even in an emergency, there's no reason to do that. No signs of a struggle, no signs of force, no blood, no skid marks, no sudden braking, but all those absences created something scarier. A scene that was too clean enough to feel staged. Sergeant Myers keyed his radio and reported back to the station. His voice was steady but low. Vehicle located. No sign of the victim. Something isn't right. A simple phrase, but it officially marked the moment Linda Harwood's disappearance stopped being just a worried family in the night, and became a situation the entire force knew wouldn't end easily. And in the thickening fog along the Platte, that feeling spread fast. Linda had left the hospital to go home. Somehow, she never made it, and the abandoned car in the middle of the night only made the one question heavier: where did she disappear, and why? Under the dull yellow lights of the patrol cars, Linda's Pontiac Bonneville became clearer than when it was first spotted in the fog. Police had taped off a small area around the car and set up temporary barriers to make sure no fisherman or late-night driver accidentally disturbed the scene. The air along the Platte at nearly 3 a.m. was colder than usual. The wind came in short gusts, carrying the smell of water and wet earth from the river, but for the officers at the scene, the thing they felt most wasn't the cold cutting through their jackets, it was the growing wrongness in every small detail around the missing woman's car. Sergeant Carl Myers stood by the driver's door, leaning in to examine the interior with a large flashlight. He didn't touch anything, procedure, but just looking through the half-open door was enough to tell him something was very off. First, the driver's seat. It was pulled much farther forward than normal. Linda was almost 5'7" according to her husband, and she always drove with the seat pushed back, roomy and comfortable, because nursing gave her a slight backache on long drives. That matched the habit of most people her height, but right now the seat was positioned for someone shorter, pulled so close the driver's knees would nearly touch the wheel. That didn't fit, especially on a cold night. There was no reason Linda would suddenly scoot the seat forward like that. Myers shone his light under the seat. No scratches, no signs of forceful movement. The seat was manually adjusted, so someone had to sit in it and pull it forward to their own preferred position. And if the seat was adjusted for the driver's build, then that driver wasn't Linda. But Myers didn't say it out loud. Just a short note in his notebook: driver seat position does not match victim's habit. Second detail: young Officer Lanning stood by the passenger door and leaned into the cabin. "Sergeant, this looks weird." He aimed his flashlight at the floorboard on the passenger side. Something small lay tucked almost under the seat, half hidden in shadow. Myers stepped over and looked closer. It was a gray handkerchief, folded sloppily, as if someone had balled it up and shoved it down there. What made Myers pause longer was the faint pattern on the edge, simple but neat embroidery, the kind found on men's gift set handkerchiefs from that era. Linda, according to Mark and her co-workers, she never used that kind. She was a nurse. If she needed to wipe something, she used medical wipes or tissues. There was no lipstick, no makeup smudge, no long hairs on the cloth, but there was a fine brown dust, not the kind of dirt from the riverbank, which was wet and darker. Myers didn't touch it, just added another line: unknown handkerchief, not victims, does not match personal items. Third, and the detail that made the whole group fall silent for a few seconds, was right outside on the windshield. In the lower corner near the passenger side wiper blade, there was a small smear of light brown dirt, streaked in a direction Myers immediately noticed was wrong. Night wind along the Platte usually blew west to east, following the river and the land's natural shape. Any dust or condensation on the glass would streak that way. But this smear ran diagonally upward in the complete opposite direction, like someone had placed a hand or object on the glass and dragged it up. No fingerprints, but a clear swipe. And if someone had stood in front of the car long enough to make that mark, they had to be there right after the car stopped. All of it: the wrong seat position, the strange handkerchief, the dirt smear going against the wind, wasn't enough to prove anything yet. But for experienced officers at a scene, small details like these always carried weight. No struggle, no broken glass, no blood, no clear footprints in the damp dirt, but the absence of those things made the scene unnaturally clean. Myers straightened up and looked at the car abandoned on the foggy riverbank. He knew this feeling. The feeling that the scene didn't reflect what actually happened. It was like a room cleaned too thoroughly after a wild party, spotless but not natural. Behind him, an officer said quietly, "Like somebody tried to make everything look normal." Myers didn't answer. He just wrote in his notebook, "Signs of third-party intervention." The night was still thick, but from that moment on, Linda Harwood's disappearance was no longer the case of an adult who vanished into the night on her own. This was a crime scene, and the scene was saying someone else's hand had entered her final journey. And that was only the beginning. The next morning, before the sun could break through the gray clouds hanging over Grand Island, officers were already back at St. Francis Hospital. They knew everything started here. The last place Linda was seen by others. The hallways still smelled of the familiar disinfectant, rubber-soled shoes squeaked along the tile, the PA system called patient names. Life here went on as if nothing had happened. But for the investigators, every tiny detail from the last hours of yesterday's shift suddenly became a piece that could decide the entire direction of the case. They started with the simplest people, Linda's night shift co-workers. Many of them remembered the previous night perfectly, not because anything special happened, but precisely because it was so ordinary. One nurse who worked the same shift said Linda finished her last chart, returned the med tray, checked on her patients, then changed to go home. She didn't seem worried or rushed, she said, unconsciously clutching her coffee cup. She smiled and told me she couldn't wait to sleep straight through till noon. Linda always complained about night shifts being exhausting, but last night was nothing out of the ordinary. A resident doctor remembered a small conversation right before Linda left. She talked about the family dinner she'd missed, and promised the kids she'd make it up with pancakes the next day. No mention of fighting with her husband, no signs of stress, no hint of needing to get away for a while, the kind of thing police always ask about in missing person cases. Everyone repeated the same thing. Linda left the hospital the way she always did, normal, on time. Nothing to suggest what was coming. A night security guard at the back gate said he saw Linda walk to the parking lot and drive off by herself. She waved at me like always, he said. I watched her taillights until she turned onto the main road. The car went straight, no weaving, nobody tailing her too close. Writing it all down, the officers still had nothing solid to grab onto. Linda left the hospital alone, alert, driving normally. She didn't look like someone about to disappear. If all that was true, then what happened after her car left the yellow lights of the hospital parking lot and melted into the fog outside? After leaving St. Francis, the team moved to the next step, canvassing her usual route. Mark Harwood had told them Linda almost always took the same way home from the hospital, merge onto the main road, cross a few intersections, then turn into the south side neighborhood where their house was. It was the shortest route, fewest red lights, and most of her co-workers confirmed they often saw Linda's car on that stretch every night. But last night no one had seen her car on that familiar stretch. Instead, a statement came from somewhere they didn't expect, a small gas station in the opposite direction. The young night shift cashier said that shortly after the hospital shift ended, she saw a car matching the description of a light blue Pontiac pass the station's windows and turn onto the road that led toward the Platte River instead of continuing straight toward the residential area. I'm not 100% sure it was her, the girl said, staring at the doodles on her notepad, as if trying to pull the memory back, but it looked exactly like the kind of car that parked at the hospital. I remember, because I used to bring coffee out to the nurses, they drove cars like that. That car didn't turn toward the south side houses, it went down toward the river. The officers wrote it down without jumping to conclusions. It could be a different car, it could be coincidence, but if it was Linda's car, that meant after leaving the hospital, she didn't take her usual route home. She turned off toward a much quieter area, exactly where the car was later found. That opened a new possibility: either Linda chose to turn that way, or someone made her turn. While they were still sorting through that, another statement came from a completely different direction. A long-haul trucker, resting at a highway pull-off, heard police were asking about a light blue car and walked over. He said the previous night, he saw a small older sedan driving alone on a stretch of highway west of town, quite a distance from the hospital. I'm not sure it was exactly that Pontiac. It was real foggy, he said. But I remember it was going pretty slow, then suddenly sped up when another truck appeared behind it. Just one person driving, no car right behind it. That statement pulled the story in yet another direction. If it was Linda's car, and it really appeared on that highway, she had gone much farther than her route home. And if the car was seen driving alone, either Linda was still behind the wheel at that point, or the perpetrator, if there was one hadn't yet stopped to stage the scene. In less than 24 hours, investigators had 3 different kinds of witness statements that didn't line up into one clear picture. Linda left the hospital normally, driving alone toward her usual route. A cashier thought she saw the same car turn toward the river instead of the neighborhood. A trucker remembered seeing a similar car driving slow, then speeding up, on a completely different highway. 3 arrows pointing 3 different ways, none clear enough to be certain, but none could be ignored. When they gathered in the small meeting room at the station, the officers spread the notes across the table. On the papers, witness names sat next to short descriptions: left hospital normally, turned toward Platte, car alone on highway. Every line was a fragment of human memory, distorted, subjective, easily warped by fog, by time, by fear or wishful thinking. But that was all police had in the first 24 hours, and as they tried to piece those fragments together, they started to feel one thing clearly: something didn't add up about the night Linda vanished. Not just between the car scene and the statements, but between the statements themselves. One person said she went this way, another said an identical car went that way. Someone insisted the car was alone, someone else wasn't sure who was behind the wheel. And in that overlap, for the first time in the investigation, the idea of a third hand, someone else stepping into what should have been Linda's simple drive home, started creeping into the minds of the people sitting around the paper-covered table. They couldn't call it a crime yet, couldn't say kidnapping, murder, or voluntary disappearance. But one thing was becoming clearer than ever: Linda hadn't simply gotten lost on the way home. Someone, or something, had bent that route off course. And in those first 24 hours, the small contradictions in the statements quietly laid the foundation for a case that would take nearly 40 years to fully understand. The morning of the second day after Linda vanished, the search expanded across the entire south side of Grand Island. The night before, they had only focused on locating the car and securing the scene. But by this morning, as the fog slowly lifted and the Platte River bank revealed long stretches of damp earth, police knew they had to widen the radius far beyond where the Pontiac was found. This was no longer a routine search. It had turned into a full-scale sweep over rough terrain full of dust, reeds, and narrow trails that barely held a track. K-9 units were brought in from Kearney while it was still half dark. The dogs, trained to track missing persons, started by scenting Linda's coat and purse, items found untouched in the car. The first dog, Jasper, a big seasoned German Shepherd male, immediately turned toward the grassy area and pulled his handler fast. But only a few dozen yards out, Jasper stopped short, circled as if he'd lost the trail, then tried another direction only to stop again. The scent wasn't continuous, it was broken, interrupted midway. Not by wind, there was almost no wind that morning. Not by rain, it had been dry for 3 days. This puzzled the team. In ordinary missing person cases, dogs follow a relatively clear line, even if the victim is far away. Here, the scent trail shattered like pieces someone had deliberately scattered. A second dog was released near the edge of the bank, where the wild grass grew knee-high. It ran faster, sniffing constantly, then gave a low bark, as if it had found something. The whole team rushed over. Beneath dry branches and rotting leaves was a patch of ground pressed down, as if someone had stepped hard, or something heavy had been placed there. But the most striking thing wasn't the depression itself, it was the faint drag mark beside it, about 40-50 centimeters long, running through the grass. An officer knelt, touched the broken blades, and said quietly, "Looks like drag marks." Yet every trace that could have told them size, direction, or weight had been oddly destroyed. The grass was crushed in multiple directions, blurring the original path. Some stalks were snapped straight across, others bent the opposite way. No continuous body slide, no strip of scraped dirt, no clear shoe prints, nothing solid enough to give direction. The only certainty: this wasn't made by an animal. It carried the signs of deliberate action. But deliberate for what? Dragging what? And why? When the sonar team arrived from Lincoln, they scanned the Platte River bottom with echo-sounding gear, a technique not common in the 80s, but still used for submerged cars, bodies, or large objects. Steady pings echoed back through the operator's headphones from the riverbed. Nothing unusual, except a few rotten branches and rocks. No human body, no other vehicle, nothing large dumped near where the Pontiac sat. They shifted downstream. Same empty result. Police switched to foot search, walking the riverbank, probing every clump of reeds. They found a few footprints, old ones from fishermen or campers. None led to the car, no fresh prints, no running prints, no scuffs, nothing. And it was that nothing that made the team stand still for a few seconds. A disappearance scene, especially by a river, almost always leaves something: dropped items, footprints, signs of running, or at least logically disturbed earth. Here, everything looked flattened, not by wind, not by rain, not by animals, but by someone. Sergeant Myers stood over the drag mark and studied it for a long time. He recognized what an experienced investigator would spot immediately. The drag mark had once been clearer longer, but it had been partially erased by cross-stepping, sweeping branches back and forth, snapping grass in conflicting directions. Not accidental, not rushed, calculated. Someone trying to erase evidence. Erased, but not thoroughly enough to confuse completely, just enough to muddy the trail. The search team probed the area with sticks and found only twisted grass and a small patch of turned-up soil, not enough to say what happened, but enough to prove another person had been there. Linda couldn't have left the car, dragged herself, then erased her own tracks. Slowly, a conclusion no one wanted to face took shape. Linda may not have left this place alone. The disappearance no longer looked like an accident or getting lost. It was starting to look like intervention, silent, careful, deliberate. And as the sun rose fully, shining on the lonely Pontiac on the riverbank, the investigators understood they were dealing with a case whose traces had been altered before they even arrived. They just didn't know yet that this was only the first layer someone had skillfully covered. The first suspect list was drawn up that same second morning, once police had enough scattered statements to realize Linda couldn't have vanished on her own. Sergeant Myers and the team listed 12 people who might be connected, not because they believed any specific person was guilty, but because the first hours are always critical for identifying who was near the scene, who left the area at odd times, and who might have seen or heard something they didn't yet realize was important. The list included the last co-workers who saw Linda leave the hospital, the gas station clerk who saw a car like the Pontiac turn toward the river road, the highway trucker, 3 residents living near the Platte pull-off, 2 regular fishermen who parked there, and most noticeable, 2 men in a blue van a witness reported arguing loudly near the disappearance area. They started with the easiest. The gas station clerk confirmed she only saw the car, not the driver, and the station's camera wasn't running continuously, so it gave no further help. Her statement was noted but didn't identify who was inside. The trucker, re-interviewed about the highway stretch, insisted he couldn't be sure it was Linda's Pontiac, only that the car was driving unusually slow and seemed confused, maybe because of the fog. He had a solid alibi. His logbook showed the exact route and times he never left his rig. The 3 nearby residents were questioned. One middle-aged man recalled hearing a strange thud like metal hitting metal, but he didn't check because he figured it was someone slamming a car door. Pressed for timing, he admitted he wasn't sure exactly when. None of the 3 had anything more concrete. All had alibis. One was on night shift, one visiting relatives in Lincoln, the third confirmed home with his wife all evening. Next, the fishermen, 2 men from nearby Doniphan, who often fished at night. A witness had seen their van parked at the pull-off before the Pontiac appeared. They drew attention, not just for being there but for the loud argument a passerby overheard. Brought in for questioning, both admitted to a heated fight over football betting debt right around the time Linda left the hospital, but they cooperated fully. They said they left the riverbank before 10:45 p.m. to go home. That was confirmed by a convenience store receipt at 11 p.m. and grainy VHS footage showing both men buying beer. No mud, no suspicious marks. Their van was checked, no fibers, dirt or traces matching the scene. Both were cleared. The list then moved to a man a female witness said had been driving behind Linda when she left the hospital. He was identified as Evan Marshall, a technician living in East Grand Island. He confirmed he was behind a light blue sedan, leaving the hospital lot because he was dropping his wife off for her night shift. Evan said the car ahead drove completely normally and turned off after a few minutes. Old intersection camera stills, one frame every 20 seconds, showed a car matching the Pontiac on Evan's route, and crucially, Evan's own car in the same footage. No contradiction. Evan cleared. One by one they were called in, questioned, timelines checked, alibis verified, statements cross-referenced. Some alibis were rock solid, others weaker but not enough to hold anyone. The list of 12 quickly shrank to no one who truly fit. No clear motive, no one seen with Linda, no one near the Pontiac, no one with traces tying them to the abandoned riverbank scene. Eliminating suspects is normal procedure in missing person cases, but here it left a chilling void. If not them, then who? More importantly, if someone had touched the car, moved the seat, left the handkerchief, smeared the windshield, where did that person go? That person left no shoe prints, no clear fingerprints, was seen by no one, heard no struggle, and when all 12 were crossed off, investigators faced a cold possibility. The perpetrator, if there was one, was someone no witness ever saw, someone outside the usual circle, someone who could appear in the night, reach Linda, then vanish, leaving only a scene too clean to feel natural. This was the moment the investigation shifted from search for a missing person to something darker. Linda hadn't simply disappeared. Someone had stepped into her drive home, and their first move had already made the whole force blind. That second afternoon, officers returned to the Harwood house to take a formal statement from Mark. It's a step that can't be skipped in any disappearance, not because Mark was a suspect, but because what he said could help reconstruct the previous night's timeline. Mark opened the door, looking exhausted, eyes red from worry, but still trying to stay calm, repeating that he just wanted Linda found safe. Police noted that, but they also knew that in many cases, the spouse is the first person scrutinized. Myers and two officers stepped into the dimly lit living room, where a cold cup of coffee sat on the table. Mark sat down, hands clasped, occasionally glancing at the window, as if expecting someone. Asked to recount the entire evening again, he began clearly and coherently, so clearly that Myers looked up from his notebook. Linda got off at 10 o'clock. She's usually home in 10 minutes, Mark said. Around 10:30 I started noticing, because she never comes home late without calling. I phoned the hospital but no one picked up, they were changing shifts. He took a sip of cold coffee and continued. By 11 o'clock I was really worried. I called a couple of Linda's friends, they didn't know anything. Then I drove the route she takes, saw nothing. Mark's statement was concise, clear, and clean. No gaps, nothing illogical. He said he'd been home all evening, playing with the kids until they slept, watching a ball game on TV while waiting for Linda. Everything made sense, everything fit, and that's exactly what put the police on alert. Perfect timelines are rare in real life. Truly anxious people misremember details, times, actions driven by emotion. Mark didn't. He remembered every minute, when he called, when he left the house, when he came back after finding nothing. Myers wrote, "Timeline very clean, too clean," but that alone wasn't enough to mark him suspicious. Nothing incriminating, just a perfection that made them cautious. They kept asking, "Did you leave the house before 10 p.m.? No, I was home from putting the kids down at 9 o'clock until I went looking for Linda. Anyone who can confirm that?" No, I was alone. The answer wasn't wrong, but it didn't help. No one could verify Mark was home except Mark himself. That was noted as a small gap, minor, but valuable in an investigation. Myers moved to specifics. "Did you hear Linda's car last night?" No. "Do you know if Linda was meeting anyone after work?" No. "Linda isn't the type." Every answer came instantly, no hesitation. Again, too instant. Officer Lanning, sitting beside Myers, asked softly, "While you were looking for Linda, what routes did you take?" Mark answered so precisely, they double-checked later. "From the house out to Sycamore, turned onto Highway 9, straight to the intersection near the hospital, then back the same way, a route, too short, too simple, too clean to prove a real search. But Myers still couldn't call it suspicious. Some panicked husbands drive randomly, others stick to familiar roads. You can't convict on that. Yet when Mark's account was compared with routine details gathered about Linda, small things started not lining up. Nothing conclusive, just worth noting. For example, Mark said Linda was always home on time. Co-workers said she sometimes stayed a few extra minutes to finish charts. Not a direct contradiction, but it showed Mark described Linda's habits a little too ideally. Or Mark said he called the hospital at 10:30. Hospital logs showed the call at 10:41. 11 minutes later. An 11-minute difference could be stress-related memory error, or it could be deliberate. No single detail was enough for suspicion. They kept pressing about the night. Mark stayed calm. Logical. In most missing person cases, by this point, family members start mixing up details, misremembering, or showing emotional cracks. Mark didn't break, didn't lose control, didn't ask too many why questions. He just repeated, "I just want her back. She's never done this." Myers watched closely. Mark was genuinely worried, but not deeply rattled. Could be personality. Or, maybe not. The interview ended with nothing cracking. No clear contradictions, no evasion, no hard evidence. But as they stepped out of the Harwood house, Myers said quietly to Lanning, "Something about his timeline, too smooth to feel natural." Lanning asked, "You think he's involved?" Myers shook his head. "Not yet, but he can't be cleared. A perfectly clean timeline is never a good sign." And that's when they realized, even though Mark wasn't a suspect yet, he was definitely someone they'd have to come back to later. They didn't know yet that those small mismatches would eventually unlock the whole case. Right now they just sat quietly on the first pages of the file, tiny doubts waiting to connect. On the morning of the third day, police went door to door in the South Side neighborhood again, looking for anyone who might have seen something the night Linda vanished. Most neighbors repeated the same line, "We didn't see anything. It was too foggy." But when they reached the house across and slightly down from the Harwoods, the Walsh residence, they heard the first piece of information that put a real crack in Mark's seemingly solid story. Dorothy Miles, 68, who lived next door to the Walshes, said while pulling back her curtain, "I'm not sure it matters, but that night I saw Rebecca, the girl next door, get into Mark's car." The statement made Myers spin around. "You're sure it was Mark's car? I've lived here 20 years. I know whose car is whose. What time did you see this?" "Not exactly, but definitely after 9:30. 9:30. That was when Mark said he was still home, before he went looking for Linda. And when he said Rebecca was babysitting inside his house, not outside meeting anyone." The statement immediately shifted focus to 17-year-old Rebecca Walsh, the Harwood's babysitter. When police knocked, Rebecca appeared visibly shaken, hair hastily tied back, hands clenched so tight, her knuckles went white. "I already told you," she said the moment they asked to sit down. "I was at the house the whole night. The kids went to sleep early. I didn't leave the Harwood house." Her voice trembled slightly, but that could just be nerves. Myers stayed gentle. "What time did you get there?" "Around 8 o'clock, when Mark called over. Linda had the night shift, so I watched the kids. While you were there, did you step outside at all?" "No, never. I know the rules." Everything sounded logical, until Mrs. Miles's statement. Rebecca didn't know police already had that information. They circled around, testing natural reactions. "Did you see Linda come home, or leave?" "No, I didn't see her." "Did you hear Mark go anywhere?" "No, I don't think so. I thought he was in the living room." The answers were too neat, too clean for a teenager, with no reason to hide anything. Myers asked softly, but crucially, "Are you sure you never stepped outside, even for a few minutes?" Rebecca froze. Just for a second, but long enough for someone like Myers to notice the struggle. She looked down, squeezing her hands tighter. "I don't really remember. Maybe I stepped onto the porch for a second. But that was all." The shift from never to maybe, is a major red flag in interviews. Pressed further about that night, Rebecca started to unravel. Her confidence faded. I think Mark had the TV on, or maybe the radio. I'm not sure. What time did the kids fall asleep? Around 8:30, or 9 o'clock. I don't remember exactly. Did you see Mark make any phone calls? No, I didn't see. The small holes didn't prove guilt, but they destroyed the smooth timeline Mark had given. And more importantly, they placed Rebecca as a key witness who might know more than she wanted to say. Myers decided to confront directly, but kept his tone calm. Rebecca, we have information that someone saw you get into Mark's car that night. It hit like a blade. Rebecca's eyes widened. She stepped back, face drained of color. No, that's not. She's certain. And it wasn't far from the time Linda disappeared. Rebecca brought a hand to her mouth. For a moment, she looked ready to cry, then fought for breath. I didn't do anything wrong. We're not saying you did. We just need to know what happened. Rebecca stared at the floor, hair falling on both sides of her face. After a long silence, she said something that stopped everyone cold. Mark told me not to tell, that some things could be misunderstood. I was scared. Myers leaned forward. Scared of what, Rebecca? Silence. She pressed her lips together, then shook her head. No, I'm not supposed to say. Myers changed tactic. Rebecca, you're not a suspect. You're not in trouble. But if you're holding back something we need to know, Linda may never be found. The room went dead quiet. A small shudder ran through Rebecca's shoulders. Then she blurted out something no one expected. I did get in Mark's car, but only for a minute. I don't know anything else. I swear. Myers asked instantly, why did you get in the car? Rebecca choked out. He told me to come outside for a second, to talk privately. But I can't say. I promised. Yes. He said if I told anyone it would make everything worse. The air in the room changed completely. A private meeting between Mark and Rebecca, on the exact night Linda vanished, directly contradicted everything Mark had told them. It didn't prove guilt, but it shattered the perfect timeline. And most importantly, it placed Mark in active concealment, something that never appears in innocent disappearances. Rebecca kept trembling lightly. I don't know anything about Linda. I just did what he told me. Police couldn't push harder. She was too young, too scared, and clearly influenced by Mark. But they knew one thing for sure. The piece named Rebecca Walsh had just pulled the case onto a new path. A path where Mark Harwood was no longer on the sidelines. And in the investigation file, Myers underlined one single line: Mark's timeline, no longer clean. When the investigation team returned to the station to compile everything from the first 72 hours, they decided to re-examine every piece of data related to the Harwood family's communications the night Linda disappeared. Not just statements, but every phone signal, every log, every detail forgotten in the old files was pulled back into the light and buried among the dusty yellowed pages of old telephone logs. They found something that should never have been overlooked: an incoming call to the Harwood residence at 9:50 p.m., just 10 minutes after Linda left the hospital parking lot. Myers froze when he saw the number. It sat among dozens of unimportant calls, but the time, 9:50 p.m., made him look twice. Mark had sworn he received no call from Linda, and that he only phoned the hospital after 10:30. Yet the log showed an incoming call, lasting exactly 22 seconds, at 9:50 p.m. That rang out with no answer. No one picked up, just a ring, and then it stopped. By itself, that wasn't suspicious. Anyone can dial a wrong number. What made the call significant was its origin. Police cross-checked the data. The call came from a public payphone at the Windmill Gas Mart, 6 minutes' drive from the hospital, located exactly at the intersection between Linda's usual route home and the road that turns down to the Platte River bank. Myers immediately requested any surviving footage from that location the night Linda vanished. In 1985, gas station security cameras were crude VHS machines that recorded over tapes. Most were long gone or overwritten. But miraculously, or rather strangely, one October 1985 tape from the Windmill station was still in storage, misfiled in a box labeled employee training tapes. When they played it, the picture was grainy, snowy, washed out, but after slowing it down and boosting the brightness, a segment captured the corner of the payphone at the edge of the lot. Right around the time of the 9:50 p.m. call, despite the terrible quality, a female figure could be seen standing at the phone. Not Linda. Didn't look like Linda. The woman had shoulder-length brown hair, was roughly 4 inches shorter than Linda, held the receiver, head slightly bowed as if speaking briefly. The strangest part wasn't that the person on the tape wasn't Linda, it was how she left. She looked up just as a passing car's headlights swept across part of her face, enough to show she was younger than Linda with lightly curled hair. Then she yanked her hand away fast, and walked out of frame as if afraid of being seen. The short clip lasted only seconds, but it was enough for Myers to feel something was wrong, and it got worse when they realized this payphone call was never investigated in 1985. It had been marked not relevant because no one answered, and because back then, police still treated adult disappearances as people have the right to leave. They never expanded the search, never looked for who was at that payphone, never connected the windmill tape to the case, never cross-referenced the timing with Linda's departure from the hospital. It was all filed under excess data. Myers took a deep breath. A heavy feeling crawled down his spine, because now, when Rebecca's statement was added to the picture, the 9:50 p.m. call was no longer random. It happened precisely when Linda left the hospital. Mark said he was home. Rebecca claimed she never left the Harwood house, yet a neighbor saw her get into Mark's car, and meanwhile, an unknown woman called the Harwood home and left no message. This opened several possibilities. 1. The call was a signal from someone other than Linda. 2. The call was to verify whether Mark was home. 3. The call was meant to create the impression Linda was still alive at that moment. 4. The call was part of a third-party plan to erase tracks or mislead. None were proven, but all were chilling in their own way. When the tape was shown to a behavioral analyst, he said immediately, her body language, pulling her hand away from the payphone so fast, that's not someone making a casual call or asking for help. That's someone who wants to be seen as little as possible. Myers asked the tech team, can we ID her? Answer no. Too grainy, face unclear, low angle. But one thing was certain, the woman on the tape was not Linda Harwood, and that directly contradicted the original assumption that maybe Linda had called home. When the 9:50 p.m. call was slotted into the timeline, the case stopped being merely unusual and started showing signs of manipulation. It felt like an invisible hand moving events in the dark, a hand that wanted police looking the wrong way from the very first minutes. And right then Myers realized, this disappearance had been tampered with far earlier than they ever imagined. The 9:50 p.m. call wasn't just a clue, it was a reminder that someone had acted, appeared and reached the Harwood family, only minutes after Linda vanished. A crucial lead, buried for 40 years. In the days after discovering the 9:50 p.m. payphone call, the Grand Island investigation team reached peak tension. Every scattered piece, conflicting statements, an overly clean scene, erased drag marks, the strange handkerchief, a call from a woman who wasn't Linda, turned the case into a maze. Yet no matter how hard they pushed, none of it led anywhere concrete, and most importantly, no Linda. Not finding the victim in the first 48 hours already slashed survival odds. By day 5, then day 6, the search teams had to face the reality they didn't want to admit. They had nothing to hold on to. Riverbank searches stretched miles in both directions with no trace. Sonar found no body or large object underwater. Volunteer groups combed reeds, fields, low-lying pits, and found only trash and old footprints unrelated to Linda. K-9 units returned to the scene a second time, then a third. Same result. Scent trails broke off at the same old spots. No further progress. At the station, the meeting room at the end of the hall overflowed with maps, arrow diagrams, route sketches, and dozens of printed phone logs. The more data they had, the messier the picture became. Every time they tried to fit the pieces together, It led to the same uncomfortable conclusion: something happened to Linda. But every trace had been wiped or distorted from the start. They had no direct witnesses. The trucker only saw a silhouette in the fog. The gas station clerk only saw a car pass, unsure who was driving. The woman at the payphone on the tape wasn't Linda, and no one could identify her, where she came from, or what she was doing there. Rebecca Walsh, the only witness whose story cracked, was a terrified 17-year-old influenced by Mark, and too scared to say more clearly. And Mark, despite his too clean timeline, still had no direct evidence against him. He wasn't seen near the scene. No one heard screams from the Harwood house. No one saw Linda meet anyone unusual. No one saw a second person at the riverbank. No one heard a sound in the thick fog. No witnesses, no sightings, no sounds. Police turned to physical evidence, and that's where they hit the biggest wall. The Pontiac was too clean. No blood, no foreign fingerprints, no muddy shoe prints, no collision damage, no dropped items, no signs of struggle. Forensic experts in 1985 could do little beyond photographing and sealing the scene. Technology was so limited that even strange fibers in the car couldn't be DNA tested. The handkerchief, the most suspicious item, was simply logged with no deeper analysis. It was described generically: gray handkerchief, origin undetermined. Soil stuck under the car was noted, but no one knew what region it came from, or thought it might matter. The faint drag marks in the grass, partially destroyed, yielded no firm conclusions, and ultimately, the car scene, despite feeling tampered with, left no legally strong evidence. The deeper they dug, the thicker the files grew, and the less they contained. No one said it out loud, but everyone on the team knew the case was going cold. A disappearance with no body is hard. A disappearance with no body, no witnesses, no trace, no physical evidence, is almost impossible. On the seventh day, a closed-door meeting was held. Myers stood in front of the whiteboard, marker in hand, but writing nothing. He looked at officers who hadn't slept properly in days, who had torn apart every clump of grass by the river, questioned dozens of witnesses, scrutinized every blurry CCTV frame. "We have nothing new to follow," he said quietly. Silence filled the room. A young officer spoke up. "So what do we do now?" Myers answered with one word: wait. 2 weeks passed, then 3. No ransom calls, no body found, no sightings of Linda anywhere else, no signals at all. Finally, after more than a month, the case was officially classified. No further leads. Not closed, but pushed down the priority list. Linda Harwood, the woman who left the hospital on a cold late October night, melted into Nebraska's fog, and from that moment, her case began its long slide into decades of darkness, a disappearance too perfect, too clean, too devoid of clues, that even the original investigators privately admitted, though never out loud, they had lost the trail. From late 1985 through early 1988, Linda Harwood's missing person file still sat on Sergeant Myers' desk and with the team, but fewer and fewer hands touched it, not because they didn't want to solve it, but because there was nothing new to do. More than a year of exhaustive investigation, no body, no new statements, no new evidence, slowly pushed the case toward the familiar shadow of every police department, the cold case cabinet. In February 1988, the Grand Island Police Department's Records Division conducted a full reorganization of old cases. The Linda Harwood file, one of the town's biggest missing person cases, was tagged missing person, pending leads. But during that reorganization, the first mistake happened, a mistake that wouldn't be discovered for nearly 40 years. A critical evidence envelope, containing fibers and soil samples taken from Linda's car, was accidentally stapled into a 1984 theft file from another part of town. No one noticed, no one double-checked document codes, no one questioned why 2 envelopes with different soil samples were sitting next to each other, one belonging to Linda's case, one not. It wasn't malicious, just a tiny clerical error with the power to derail an entire investigation for decades. The 1990s came and went. DNA testing technology emerged. But because Linda's file was classified as no usable physical evidence, no one thought to send the handkerchief or fibers for analysis. They believed the case had no DNA samples, unaware the real evidence was sitting in a box on another floor, mislabeled, gathering dust, forgotten. When Myers retired in the early 2000s, the case still haunted him. He once told a colleague, "The Harwood case, it's like someone erased the tracks with an invisible hand. It's clean in a terrifying way." He didn't know that part of the reason it felt that way was because the key physical evidence was no longer in the file. Later investigators reviewing old cases saw only incomplete reports, a few scene photos, handwritten statements, route diagrams, but no physical items worth sending for new testing. They believed the case lacked forensic material, so no one dug deeper. In 2009, a statewide cold case review was conducted, but Linda Harwood's file wasn't prioritized because it was listed as lacking evidence suitable for new forensic techniques. In reality, the evidence existed, just in the wrong place. The 1985-86 statements, already contradictory, were never systematically cross-checked. For example, the gas station clerk's account of the car turning toward the river was never compared with the trucker's sighting. No one cross-referenced traffic maps and fog conditions that night to assess witness accuracy. Small details like the adjusted driver's seat, the dirt smear on the windshield, the strange handkerchief were noted, but never treated as legal evidence because the tools to analyze them didn't exist yet. No trace evidence analysis, no UV light for latent prints, no microsoil comparison by region. The case was therefore seen as a no-trace disappearance, one of the hardest kinds, where police can only wait for someone to call with new information. But for nearly 40 years, no one called. Gradually, Linda Harwood became a familiar name in annual cold case meetings, but only as a sad file, a lesson in the limits of old-school investigation. A young officer once asked, "Why was the Linda case never solved?" A veteran investigator just sighed. "Because we had nothing." People say time solves cases, but sometimes, time only helps erase what could have solved them. In the 2010s, when other no-body homicides in neighboring states were reopened and cracked, Linda's family sent letters requesting another look, but when the file was pulled, it was still missing key pieces. No one knew the missing piece. The evidence envelope with fibers and soil was the very link that could have tied the 1985 case to a crime nearly 70 miles away. A key hidden in a mistake so small, no one thought to look for it. An envelope, misfiled for almost 40 years, and because that piece was missing, everything, conflicting statements, drag marks, strange handkerchief, was treated as too minor to pursue. Linda Harwood's disappearance became a classic example inside Nebraska law enforcement of how an investigation can fail for the smallest gaps: failure to cross-check statements, failure to inventory evidence, failure in forensic analysis, failure in patience, and failure to be suspicious of perfect timelines. Grand Island police still kept Linda's photo up in the cold case room, but over time the picture faded. The 33-year-old nurse stared into the lens with bright eyes, but behind those eyes was a truth they wouldn't understand. For nearly 40 years, the Linda Harwood case didn't lack clues. The clues had been buried inside their own files, and when that gap was finally discovered, far too late, it became a bitter lesson repeated every time Nebraska police reopened an old case. Never assume a silent file means a silent truth. In 2025, the Nebraska Department of Justice launched a statewide review of disappearances over 30 years old, especially those marked "no progress" or insufficient evidence. It was the largest program of its kind, federally funded for cold case work, using new forensic technology. When a list of over 140 files was sent to the cold case unit, Linda Harwood, missing since 1985, appeared as a sad faded name, but it caught the attention of 32-year-old Sergeant Dana Rutledge. She was exactly the age Linda had been when she vanished, and that made her pause longer in front of the black and white photo clipped to the first page. She deserved to be found, Dana said, then added the case to her personal priority list. Days later, Dana and two other investigators were in the old Grand Island Police Department storage room. a cold narrow space filled with hundreds of document boxes. 1,980 S-era boxes were labeled in faded marker, many torn or relabeled over the years. Right there, they found a detail forgotten for nearly 4 decades. Inside the box coded for Linda Harwood's case, Dana discovered a small bundle of handwritten notes by Sergeant Myers, notes that had never appeared in the official file, submitted to the prosecutor's office in 1986. The first note made the whole team go quiet. Soil smear does not match wind direction. Note again, may be important. Second note, driver's seat not in victim's normal height position. Third note, handkerchief does not belong to Linda, owner undetermined, followed by dozens of small notes, each an early suspicion that had been swallowed by the chaos of the original investigation. Dana sighed. These should have been in the legal file, not stuffed at the bottom of a box. But the biggest shock wasn't the notes. When they removed the entire file from the box to digitize it, they found a misfiled envelope with a completely different case number clipped inside another missing person file. The code on the outside was for a 1984 theft, but inside, written in blue ink, were the words, Harwood. Evidence from inside vehicle. It was the lost evidence envelope, missing for nearly 40 years, containing tiny fibers, fine soil samples, and low-quality scene photos that were never in the official file. Finding that envelope completely changed how the case was viewed, but there was something even more important. When Dana combined the original notes, statements, timelines, and scattered data, she identified 12 clear contradictions in the events before and immediately after Linda left the hospital. Contradictions once dismissed as unimportant because they didn't lead anywhere on their own. Placed together, they painted a very different picture. Dana wrote each one on the board. Contradiction 1, Mark said he called the hospital at 10:30 p.m. Log shows 10:41 p.m. Contradiction 2, Rebecca said she never left the house. Neighbor saw her get into Mark's car. Contradiction 3, gas station clerk saw a car like Linda's turn toward the river, not home. Contradiction 4, trucker saw a similar car on a completely different highway. Contradiction 5, driver's seat not in Linda's usual position. Contradiction 6, strange handkerchief not Linda's. Contradiction 7, dirt smear on windshield against the night's wind direction. Contradiction 8, no footprints, but erased drag marks. Contradiction 9, no struggle in car, yet keys left in ignition. Contradiction 10, multiple witnesses describe different car behavior. Contradiction 11, 9:50 p.m. payphone call, not from Linda, but from whom? Contradiction 12, time Mark said he left to search for Linda unverified by anyone. When all 12 contradictions were up on the board, Dana stepped back and felt a chill run down her spine. The scattered anomalies, placed side by side, weren't just questions anymore. They formed a pattern showing someone had interfered, staged or falsified the truth from the very first night. Another young investigator looked at the board and whispered, "This isn't a simple disappearance. Someone tried to make it look like one." That sentence marked the turning point. From a dusty, forgotten file, Linda Harwood's disappearance suddenly came alive again with new technology and fresh eyes. No longer hopeless, it became a solvable case, if they could find the final gap. And looking at those 12 contradictions, Dana Rutledge said only one thing: someone took Linda, and 40 years ago, we weren't ready to see it. But in 2025, they were. On the morning of April 12, 2025, in the Cold Case Unit lab in Lincoln, Nebraska, 3 pieces of evidence lay on a stainless steel table, 3 items buried in a miscoded envelope for nearly 4 decades, finally illuminated again under high-powered lab lights: the soil sample, a gray fiber, and a low-quality 1985 scene photograph. For the 2025 investigation team, these were not old pieces of evidence, they were doors that had been slammed shut the moment Linda disappeared, and they were about to open them with technology that did not exist in 1985. Soil analysis. The dirt that destroyed the Linda at the riverbank theory, the soil sample taken from the wheel wells of Linda's Pontiac, the one police in 1985 could only describe vaguely as fine reddish-brown dirt, was finally examined in 2025, using microscopic mineral profiling. Within minutes, the spectrometer delivered its verdict. This soil does not come from the Platte Riverbank area. The lab went dead quiet. Platte River soil is lighter and sandy. Linda's sample contained hematite, the red mineral typical of the clay-rich soil southwest of Grand Island. The analysis pinpointed the exact source, Old Mill Road, 8 miles from where the car was found. One investigator said it out loud. Someone drove Linda's car somewhere else first, then staged the scene at the river. That single soil sample demolished the 40-year-old assumption that Linda had driven herself to the riverbank. The car had been moved there. It was the first knockout blow to the 1985 killer's script, fiber analysis. The gray thread that put a man behind the wheel. The second item, a gray fiber less than an inch long, the one Myers had noted, does not match Linda's clothing, was finally identified in 2025, using FTIR spectroscopy and a database of 1970s, 1990s textiles. Result on screen, 100% polyester, herringbone weave, consistent with men's winter jackets, manufactured in 1984, specifically, the Woolridge Heavy Coat, Fall 1984 edition. It took the team exactly 2 days to discover. Mark Harwood purchased a Woolridge Heavy Coat at the Grand Island J.C. Penney in November 1984, 1 year before Linda vanished. He wore it in their 1983 wedding photos. He was no longer wearing it in their son's 1986 birthday pictures, but no one knew exactly when it disappeared. The fiber was found on the passenger seat of Linda's car, a seat she almost never let anyone sit in because she usually drove alone. Sergeant Dana Rutledge's conclusion: this fiber came from the man who sat in Linda's car. The odds are overwhelming it was Mark. For the first time in 40 years, the victim was no longer the only person who had been inside that vehicle. UV fingerprint. Fingerprints that surfaced after nearly 40 years. The 1985 scene photos were old and low resolution, but when rescanned with 2024 high-spectrum UV imaging, something never seen in the original file appeared. Latent fingerprints on the interior driver's side door handle that did not belong to Linda. Enhanced UV analysis revealed 3 clear oil residue prints on the interior door handle, the edge of the steering wheel, the seat adjustment lever, most crucially, the print on the seat lever. Linda was 5'4" and always kept her seat pulled forward. The print sat exactly where someone would grip to slide the seat back, consistent with a person between 5'10" and 6'1". Mark Harwood is 6 feet tall. When the newly extracted prints were digitally compared to Mark's old paper fingerprint card, 12-point match, court admissible. In the 1980s they couldn't lift faint prints off plastic. In 2025 they could. The lab investigator stated plainly, print placement isn't random, only the driver would adjust the seat that far back. Mark sat in Linda's driver's seat, no room for argument. 3 results combined, the killer's pattern emerges. Dana locked it in. The soil proves the car never went straight to the river. The fiber proves a man was inside the car. The UV prints prove that man was Mark Harwood. The picture that had been hidden for 40 years finally came into focus. The perpetrator drove Linda's car to another location, Old Mill Road, did something to the victim, then moved the car to the riverbank to stage the scene. The question was no longer, where did Linda go? It was, where did Mark take Linda that night in 1985, and why? Modern forensics had dragged Mark Harwood, the husband once considered no signs of suspicion, back to the center of the investigation, like a shadow that had been lurking silently for 4 decades. But this was only the beginning, because 2025 forensics still had one more card to play: DNA. And when they opened the final envelope, the one the case had waited 40 years for, everything would change forever. Once 2025 forensics placed Mark Harwood back at the center of the case, the cold case unit did what the 1985 team never fully managed. They found Rebecca Walsh, the most important and most vulnerable witness of all. Rebecca, now 57, lived in Fremont, Nebraska. She had left Grand Island in 1987 to forget, as she wrote in her reply email to police. Never married, living alone, working as a daycare provider. Time had not erased the wariness from her. Her eyes still carried something like a low burning fear she had hidden for 40 years. When the investigators knocked, it took Rebecca several seconds to speak. "Finally, you came," she whispered, not in surprise, as if she had always known this day would arrive. Dana Rutledge and investigator Torres sat at Rebecca's small kitchen table. The smell of old coffee and a morning radio program created an atmosphere that was both ordinary and heavy. "Rebecca," Dana began, "the Linda Harwood case has new developments. We need you to tell us everything exactly as it happened. Not what you said in 1985. Rebecca gave a sad little smile that silenced Torres. "Back then, I couldn't tell the truth," she answered. "I was just a kid." Dana didn't push. She waited. After a long moment, Rebecca looked out the window, as if seeing straight through 40 years back to that cold autumn night. "All right," she said softly. "I'll tell you. I did meet Mark that night." Rebecca placed both hands on the table, fingers laced, exactly the way she had done during her 1985 interview. "A little after 9 o'clock, Mark called me over earlier than usual," she began. "He said Linda was working the night shift, so I was to watch the kids." Dana asked, "Did you see Linda at all that evening?" Rebecca shook her head. "No, I never saw her the whole night." A long silence. "After the kids were asleep, I went downstairs to the living room. That's when Mark said he wanted me to come outside with him for a minute." This was the part Rebecca had denied in 1985. "He told me not to worry, it wouldn't take long," she continued. "He said we needed to talk about my babysitting schedule, but I knew something wasn't right." She took a deep breath. "We went out to his car. He told me to get in the passenger seat, and he locked the doors." Dana leaned forward. "What time was this?" "Close to 9:30. He wanted me to give him an alibi." Rebecca visibly shuddered as she reached the next part, as if unearthing something she had buried deep. "Mark started driving toward Old Mill Road," she said. Dana nodded slowly, exactly the area forensics had identified. "When the car stopped, he turned to me and said, 'Rebecca, tonight you never left my house. Understood? If anyone asks, you were with the kids from 8 o'clock until I got back.'" Torres asked, "Did you understand what he wanted?" Rebecca clenched her hands. "Yes, he wanted me to lie. He wanted me to be his alibi." While Rebecca spoke, the whole team recalled how the terrified 17-year-old in 1985 had dodged every question about timing, about leaving the house, about getting into Mark's car. Now they knew why. "I saw mud on his pants." But what Rebecca said next made the room go completely still. "He left me in the car for almost half an hour," she said. "I don't know where he went. I just heard the car door shut." When Mark returned, the first thing Rebecca noticed, his pants were covered in mud. Dark red mud. Dana and Torres exchanged a glance. Old Mill Road soil is red hematite-rich clay. He was breathing hard. His hands were shaking a little, Rebecca said, like he'd just done something heavy. "Did you see Linda?" Rebecca immediately shook her head, eyes filling with tears. "I didn't see anyone, I swear, but I knew he hadn't just gone out for some airs like he told me. He told me I had to stay quiet, no matter what." Rebecca said that after Mark got back in the car, he drove toward home, but stopped a short distance from the South Side neighborhood. "He told me to get out," she said. "He didn't yell, didn't threaten, but his voice made my legs shake." Mark's words that night had haunted Rebecca her entire life. "If you ever say anything, people will think you were involved. You'll lose everything. Just let it stay the way they'll think it was. You weren't anywhere tonight. Do you understand?" Rebecca had been only 17. "He knew I'd be scared. And I was," she said. "Scared for myself, scared I'd be accused, scared of him. I saw him leave the house again, after 10 o'clock. This was brand new information. I went back to watch the kids," Rebecca continued, voice hoarse. "But sometime after 10 o'clock, he drove away again." Dana asked quickly, "Are you sure?" Rebecca nodded hard. "I was standing right at the living room window. I heard the car. That was exactly the window when the phone log showed the 10:41 p.m. call, Mark calling the hospital worried about Linda. I stayed silent for 40 years, because I thought I caused it." At the end Rebecca broke down crying. I always thought, if I hadn't gone with him that night, if I hadn't gotten in the car, maybe Linda would still be alive. I always thought I made everything worse. Dana placed her hand firmly on the table. Rebecca, you didn't cause this. You were a child who was manipulated. Rebecca wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. That night, I knew something terrible had happened, but I was too afraid to speak, and I've lived with that fear for 40 years. The statement that untied the case. When Rebecca signed the new statement, the lead investigator said only one thing: your statement is the piece this case has been waiting 40 years for. It placed Mark exactly where forensics pointed, confirmed Mark left the house at the critical time, proved Mark attempted to manufacture an alibi, explained Rebecca's contradictory 1985 statements, solidified the pattern. Mark took Linda, then returned to stage the scene. With modern forensics and Rebecca Walsh's new testimony, the case, once an impenetrable wall, now had a massive breach. For the first time in 40 years, the truth could no longer hide, and the only person still missing from the picture was Mark Harwood himself. Late on the evening of May 22, 2025, in a locked conference room at the Cold Case Unit in Lincoln, Nebraska, 3 investigators stood around a huge board, covered with 1985 Grand Island traffic maps, stacked phone logs, archived National Weather Service data, and route simulations based on average 1980s car speeds. For the first time in nearly 40 years, they were going to fully reconstruct the night Linda Harwood disappeared, not based on the 1985 assumptions, but on forensics, Rebecca Walsh's new statement, and objective data. Dana Rutledge stood at the board with a red laser pointer and began rebuilding it minute by minute. We wiped the old timeline clean. Everything starts the moment Linda leaves the hospital. The room went silent. No one even breathed heavily. This was the final step to lock Mark Harwood into the crime. If the timeline fit, 9:14 p.m., Linda exits the back door of St. Francis Hospital. This exact time comes from the digitized hospital VHS security footage and coworker statements, matched to the minute. Linda grabs her purse, locks the car door, turns on the headlights. She leaves the hospital heading east on Dodgersave. 9:14, 9:21 p.m. Linda drives toward home, slow because of heavy fog. 1985 traffic maps show a 35 miles per hour limit in that zone. National Weather Service records for that night list visibility at only 300 yards. The 2025 driving simulation puts speed at 25 miles per hour. Distance from the hospital to the Old Mill Road turnoff, roughly 7 minutes. Crucially, no witness ever reported seeing Linda's car continue straight toward home, but 2 independent witnesses did see a car matching her Pontiac turn onto Old Mill Road, details dismissed in 1985 as uncertain. 9:21 p.m., Old Mill Road intersection. This is the moment Linda's car, or whoever was driving it, turned per 2025 forensics onto the red clay area southwest of town. Soil analysis confirms the dirt on the Pontiac does not come from the Platte River bank, but from exactly this zone, meaning Linda, or the person controlling the car, entered this area between 9:23 p.m. From this point forward, the timeline splits completely from Mark's story. 9:25 p.m., Mark calls Rebecca to come babysit. Harwood home phone log shows an outgoing call at 9:25 p.m. to the Walsh residence. Rebecca confirms he called earlier than usual. This raises immediate questions for the 2025 team. Why did Mark call the babysitter an hour earlier than normal? Why right when Linda was on her way home? More importantly, Mark claimed he never left the house all evening. This is now in direct irreconcilable conflict with both forensics and Rebecca's new statement. 9:30 p.m., Rebecca arrives at the Harwood house. Timing matches the phone log perfectly. The Walsh house is a 3-minute walk away, but 9:30 p.m. is also the moment the 2025 investigators circle in red. Mark leaves the house first time. Rebecca now confirms, he told me to get in the car. We went out. That single sentence destroys Mark's 1985 claim, I was home from 9 o'clock until 10:30. The timeline begins tightening around Mark like a noose. 9:30 p.m., 9:30 p.m., Mark drives Rebecca to the vacant lot on Old Mill Road. 1985 traffic maps show the drive from the Harwood house to Old Mill Road takes exactly 9 minutes, if driven straight. Rebecca, we got to an empty place. He told me to stay in the car. This window matches the forensic soil evidence perfectly. The red clay stuck to Linda's undercarriage could only have been picked up during a 9-10 minute stop or slow drive in that exact area. 9:39, 10:05 p.m., the 26-minute gap when Mark leaves the car alone. This is the biggest blank in the entire case. A 26-minute void in which no one knows where Mark went, what he did, or who he met. But forensics fills it in. Mud on Mark's pants per Rebecca. Red soil on Linda's car. Driver's seat pushed back for a 6-foot person. Mark's fingerprints on the seat adjustment lever. Mark's jacket fiber on the passenger seat. All point to one conclusion. During these 26 minutes, Mark was inside Linda's car, and Linda was no longer driving. 9:50 p.m., the payphone call from Windmill Gas Mart to the Harwood house. The call forgotten for 40 years. Replayed VHS shows a brown-haired woman at the phone under dim light, not Linda. She looks up as a car passes, then hurries away. Dana circles it in red. Alibi check call. If this was someone Mark asked to verify whether Rebecca was home, or to pin down when he left, it fits the entire pre-planned alibi pattern. 10:05 p.m., Mark returns to the car, pants covered in mud. He was breathing hard, hands shaking a little. Rebecca says, timing matches forensics fresh, still damp red mud streaks, not old dirt. Mark had direct recent contact with the exact red soil area where Linda's evidence was later found. 10:12 p.m., Mark drops Rebecca off near the Harwood house. Brand new detail. Rebecca admits, he told me to keep quiet. Then he went back inside. This lines up perfectly with the phone log. 10:41 p.m., Mark calls the hospital asking about Linda. He told police in 1985 I called as soon as I got worried. Forensics now prove, Mark left the house twice, and the 10:41 call was nothing but a performance of worry. 10:15, 10:50 p.m., Mark leaves the house a second time. Rebecca confirms, I heard his car start and drive off. This is the biggest hole in the old timeline, now filled. If Mark left a second time, he had plenty of time to drive from the house to the Platte River bank, stage the scene, leave the door ajar, place the purse on the passenger seat, and make it look like Linda walked away alone. 1985 traffic maps, house to riverbank, 12 minutes. Riverbank back home, 12 minutes. Mark had a full 35-minute window, more than enough to stage everything. 11 p.m., Mark starts to worry. This is the moment Mark told police he began searching for Linda. The new timeline shows, Mark already knew Linda wasn't coming home, because he knew she never would. Conclusion of the 2025 timeline, when every piece times maps, fog conditions, forensic statements, phone logs is fitted together, the new timeline forms an airtight picture. 1. Linda leaves hospital at 9:14 p.m. 2. Her car is diverted to Old Mill Road, not toward home. 3. Mark leaves the house at 9:30 p.m., with Rebecca. 4. Mark reaches Old Mill Road at the exact window forensics identified. 5. Mark is absent 26 minutes, the same window when no one knows where Linda went. 6. When he returns, his pants are covered in the exact soil from that area. 7. His jacket fiber is inside Linda's car. 8. His fingerprints are on the driver's seat adjustment lever. 9. The payphone call is made by an unknown woman, not Linda. 10. Mark leaves the house a second time after 10 o'clock, matching the riverbank staging window. 11. Mark calls the hospital only after the scene is staged. 12. Mark's entire alibi was built on Rebecca, coerced into silence for 40 years. Dana's final words, as she stared at the completed board. There is not a single minute that night where Mark is outside this crime. Every data point locks him to Linda Harwood's disappearance. From that moment forward, Cold Case 1985 was no longer a missing person case. It was a criminal homicide with a named perpetrator. Once the 2025 timeline locked Mark into every minute of the night, Linda vanished, the cold case unit moved to the final step, locating where Linda's body was most likely concealed. No one believed anymore that she ever reached the Platte River bank. Soil analysis had demolished that theory entirely. Rebecca placed Mark at the vacant Old Mill Road lot. Timeline and forensics both pointed northwest of Grand Island, but Nebraska is vast, and the western Sandhills region is a maze of dunes, dry prairie, red dirt, and tangled grass roots. If Mark took Linda to a burial spot out there, 1985 police had virtually no chance of finding it. No GPS, no drones, no LiDAR. But 2025 is different. The cold case unit partnered with Nebraska State Patrol and a geologic survey team using drone-mounted LiDAR, light detection and ranging technology that can see through grass canopy and detect small excavated pits, even decades after they were filled. On the morning of June 2, 2025, 4 LiDAR drones flew grid patterns over the Sandhills, starting with the zone bordering Old Mill Road, about 7 miles from the Harwood house. One investigator noted, if Mark took Linda to Old Mill Road, he wouldn't go far. He had to get back to establish the alibi. That narrowed the search to a 10-mile radius, places Mark could reach and leave within the 26-35 minutes Rebecca described. After 90 minutes of scanning, the LiDAR system returned a 3D terrain map. Hundreds of data points appeared, most natural subsidence, prairie cracks, animal digs, but in Sandhills, Sector 4, Drone 3 flagged an anomaly, a crescent-shaped depression, 18 inches deep, 1.2 meters across, with a structure completely unlike the surrounding natural geology. Dana circled it in red on the screen. That's not natural, that's a dug and filled grave. Coordinates: 40.9, 582 degrees N, 98.4697 degrees W. Exactly 4.8 miles off Old Mill Road, 11 minutes by 1985 dirt road speeds, a chilling match to the timeline. The forensic excavation team went down. 20 minutes in, a shovel struck something hard. The faint metallic clink stopped everyone cold. First item recovered, a silver necklace caked in dirt, dull, but instantly recognizable, a small bird-shaped pendant, the exact one Linda wore every day, documented in the 1985 file. Mark had even told police back then that Linda might have left it in a drawer. No one thought twice. Now it lay in the Sandhills, not at home. Second item, deeper, a St. Francis Hospital locker key. Locker C17, Linda's locker, confirmed by hospital records. Linda never left her locker unlocked. The key was always in her scrub pocket or purse, but the purse found in the car had no key, meaning the key had been removed, and Mark, the only person in the house after Linda vanished, could have taken it. Third item, the one that silenced the entire pit, a small shattered human bone, stained the color of the sand. The lab team arrived the same day. Samples were taken on site, sealed, rushed to Lincoln. Modern DNA analysis, confirmed within 12 hours, compared against DNA from 3 of Linda's preserved personal items, hairbrush, letter with saliva trace, positive match. At that moment, every old theory about Linda walking down to the river collapsed for good. Linda never left the Old Mill Road Sandhills area. The car at the river was staged. Every forensic result, soil, prints, fiber, matched. The new timeline matched. Rebecca's statement matched. Dana stood before the map, staring at the red circle around the Sandhills coordinates. This is the real crime scene, not the Platte River bank, not where Mark wanted everyone to believe, not where police searched for nearly 40 years. The real scene lay in the Sandhills, barren ground, where one man believed Nebraska wind would bury his secret forever. But in 2025, drones and LiDAR don't care about secrets. They only care about depth, soil structure, and anomalies. And this anomaly, the necklace, the locker key, the bone, was the final proof. Linda Harwood never made it to the river. The car was not driven by her. And Mark Harwood staged everything. From that instant the case was no longer a mystery. It was a crime. And the Sandhills, not the Platte, was where the story ended. But for Mark Harwood, the story was only beginning. Once the necklace, locker key and bone from the Sandhills were confirmed as Linda's, The cold case unit turned to the last question: why? Forensics could put Mark at the scene. The timeline could lock him into every minute. Rebecca's statement could expose the cover-up. But to prosecute a 40-year-old cold case, the state needed one more thing: a motive strong enough to stand up in court. And that motive, as Dana put it, is exactly what we see in so many domestic homicides: money, debt, and secrets. The financial investigation uncovered a layer of darkness 1985 could never have seen. In microfilmed records from St. Paul Credit Union, the team located copies of 2 life insurance policies, both signed by Mark, in late 1984, just months before Linda vanished. The first $50,000, the second, an accidental death rider, $100,000, both named Mark as sole beneficiary. Not huge money today, but in 1985, for a nurse and a technician, it was life-changing money to someone drowning financially. Digging deeper into the original files, Dana found the note that made her blood run cold. In Myers's long-lost 1985 notepad, a tiny scrap in hurried handwriting: Linda wanted to change beneficiary. Ask again next time. No one knows if Linda ever actually filed the change of beneficiary form. Hospital HR no longer has it, but the mere question opens the possibility. Mark knew Linda intended to remove him as beneficiary, and he couldn't let that happen. Financial records showed Mark sinking in debt: car loan, home improvement loan, credit card balances, and most damning, a $15,000 personal loan he took out using Linda's forged signature, proven by 2025 handwriting analysis. If Linda discovered or even suspected, divorce was imminent, something Mark could not survive financially. In a letter never opened until 2025, one of Mark's co-workers reported that Mark had been formally reprimanded and was at risk of losing his job. His finances were on the edge of collapse. But money wasn't the only motive. When old co-workers from 1984-85 were re-interviewed, one said something that made Dana spin around. Mark used to pick Linda up after her shift, but a few times I saw him off in a corner talking privately with Rebecca, the babysitter. Everything clicked. Rebecca's new statement already admitted Mark liked private talks with her, that he constantly found excuses to call her over, and that the night Linda vanished, he told her, "Just do what I say." Analysis of Rebecca's old diary, voluntarily surrendered, revealed repeated entries. Mark told me not to mention that to Linda. He asked me to come early again. I don't want to go anymore. Those entries turned a simple employer-babysitter relationship into something far darker: manipulation, and very possibly grooming. Kept silent, for 40 years, only because a terrified teenage girl feared being accused and misunderstood. Investigator Torres summed it up. Mark had 3 things to lose: money, his family, and control over Rebecca. He had 2 things to gain: insurance money and freedom from his financial mess. Then they found the final piece in the old files, a twice-folded sheet in Mark's handwriting, pulled from his desk drawer in 1985, and dismissed as personal notes. Under 2025 UV light, the faint ink glowed: "If she goes, everything will be okay. Just a few days." The pronoun she is never clarified, but in the context of this case, police no longer had any doubt it was about Linda. Finally, when Dana laid out the complete motive in the official report, she summarized: Mark Harwood was staring at bankruptcy. Linda intended to change the beneficiary. Rebecca was a threat to his control, and Mark needed a story that would make everything disappear, just like Linda. Money, debt, control, and the biggest lie Nebraska saw in 1985. The motive was clear. The deception was exposed. And from here only one final step remained before everything came crashing down on Mark Harwood. On July 18, 2025, after completing the 3 critical pillars: forensics, Rebecca's statement, and timeline reconstruction, the cold case unit formally submitted to the Hall County District Attorney a request for an arrest warrant against Mark Harwood on 3 charges: first-degree murder, concealment of a corpse, and staging a false crime scene, all based on evidence unearthed after nearly 40 years. No one on the team needed another minute to deliberate. What they had was overwhelming, especially against the perpetrator profile. Mark had financial motive, A pattern of continuous lies, intimidation of an underage witness, fingerprints only the driver would leave, a fiber from a jacket he once owned, mud matching the geology on his pants, the same night Linda vanished, and physical evidence at the sandhills that could only exist if Mark took Linda there. By July 21st, the warrant was signed, but Mark Harwood was no longer in Nebraska. Financial and cell phone tracking showed he had been living in Flagstaff, Arizona, since 2008, after quietly selling the Grand Island house. The federal fugitive team working with U.S. Marshals determined Mark had relocated from Nebraska to Arizona, in a quiet retirement. No one knew, no family. It took them 36 hours to pinpoint him renting a small cabin on the edge of Coconino National Forest, where he worked as a generator repairman for campgrounds. Maybe Mark thought 40 years was enough to erase every trace. Maybe he believed Nebraska would never find where Linda went, but 2025 technology is not 1985 technology. At 6:12 a.m., on July 23, as Mark stepped out of the cabin to start his old Chevy Silverado, 6 agents approached from 3 directions. Mark Harwood, the lead agent, shouted, "You are under arrest on a Nebraska warrant. Keep your hands where we can see them." Mark froze, tired eyes scanning around. He didn't resist, but his face showed no panic, only the weary look of someone who had lived too long in silence, convinced his secret would blow away with the wind forever. Inside the cabin, police found 2 items that made the cold case unit go ice cold when the field report came in. First, a 1984 Woolridge heavy coat, exact match to the fiber found on Linda's passenger seat. It was no longer new, the lining was worn, the collar frayed, a few tears, but fiber testing confirmed 100% match to the herringbone polyester in Linda's car. When asked why he had kept the jacket for 39 years, Mark said nothing. He just turned away, eyes fixed on the deep forest behind the cabin. Investigator Torres later said, "Some people keep their tools, even when the tool was used for evil." Second, and far more damning, was an old map of the Nebraska sandhills, folded many times, edges worn, but when unfolded, investigators saw 2 red ink marks, a large circle around the Old Mill Road area, and a small X placed exactly at the coordinates the LiDAR drone had flagged as the burial site. "No way that's coincidence," Dana said when she saw the crime scene photos. "It's the identical coordinate to the 100th of a degree." The map became devastating legal evidence. It proved Mark knew the sandhills location, and had marked it. No commercial map has an X there. No map comes pre-marked. Only Mark, the map, together with the jacket, turned an already airtight case into something virtually indefensible. As he was walked to the car, Mark stayed completely silent. One agent later recalled, "He looked like a man who had already given up the fight, like the only thing he feared wasn't arrest, it was having his 40-year secret dragged into the light." That same afternoon, Mark was flown back to Nebraska under marshal escort. The flight was silent. Dana Rutledge was waiting at Hall County when they brought Mark into booking. Facing the man who had convinced an entire town his wife vanished into the Nebraska fog, Dana said only one thing, "Mark, we found Linda." For the first time since his arrest, Mark blinked hard, not from shock, but from knowing the biggest lie of his life was over. In the handcuffs on his wrists, a 40-year run came crashing down in an instant. Nebraska finally had the perpetrator of the 1985 disappearance, but justice had only just begun. On August 5, 2025, in the grand jury room at Hall County Courthouse, Grand Island's longest-running missing person case entered its decisive phase. No cameras, no press, no family. Only the prosecutor, 16 grand jurors, and a mountain of brand-new forensic evidence never heard in 1985. On the table in front of Prosecutor Jane Merritt were 3 sealed boxes, soil evidence, 1985 2025, fiber sample, Exhibit 14, and UV fingerprint analysis, Harwood vehicle. Beside them, a 200-plus page photocopy of Rebecca Walsh's statement, the statement no one in 1985 ever imagined would become the key. When the hearing began, Merritt opened with a line that silenced the room. "This was never a missing person case. From the very first night, it was a murder." and the perpetrator did everything possible to make us look the wrong way. Soil evidence. Linda never reached the Platte River bank. Merritt projected the lab's geologic map. This is the soil from under Linda's car. This is Platte River bank soil. Two completely different colors, mineral compositions, particle structures. Merritt continued, and this is soil from Old Mill Road, the area Mark Harwood was in that night, per Rebecca Walsh. 98% match. A grand juror asked, "Are you saying the car was taken to the river?" Merritt nodded without hesitation. Exactly. The car did not drive itself there. It couldn't. No Platte soil underneath. No river mud. No water. Only Old Mill Road dirt. The car was staged. The room rode in heavy silence. Fiber evidence. The fiber does not belong to Linda. It belongs to Mark's jacket. Merritt held up the small evidence bag. Gray polyester, herringbone weave. This fiber could not have come from any of Linda's clothing. On screen, the Woolridge heavy coat seized from Mark's Flagstaff cabin. This jacket, Merritt continued, was purchased by Mark Harwood in November 1984. The fiber in Linda's car is an exact match. A juror asked, "Where exactly was the fiber found in the car?" "Passenger seat." Merritt answered, "The seat Linda had no passenger in that night, and forensics shows a male weight impression on the cushion." No one spoke further. One tiny fiber, enough to lock Mark inside that car. UV fingerprint. Prints only the driver would leave. Merritt showed the UV-enhanced 1985 scene photos. Under violet light, 3 latent prints glowed clearly. Seat adjustment lever, steering wheel rim, interior door handle. Merritt pointed to the seat lever. "This is a spot only the driver touches, and this print belongs to Mark Harwood, no one else." An older juror asked, "Are we sure Linda didn't adjust the seat?" Linda was 5'4", her seat was always pulled forward. Co-workers confirmed. That night the seat was pushed back to exactly the distance a 6-foot man needs, Mark's height. Silence. Forensics didn't just put Mark in the car, forensics put Mark in the driver's seat. Rebecca Walsh's statement. Mark's alibi was a coerced plan. Merritt opened the thick statement folder. Rebecca Walsh, age 17 in 1985, is finally telling the truth. Mark Harwood took her in his car, forced her to be his alibi, and left her alone for nearly 30 minutes in the Old Mill Road lot. Merritt read Rebecca's exact words. When Mark came back, his pants were covered in red mud. "I knew he had just done something." A juror asked, "Is there any proof Rebecca isn't lying now?" Merritt answered instantly, "Yes, soil analysis, timeline, LiDAR map, the Sandhills map with Mark's red ink X at the exact burial coordinates. Every single detail interlocks." Rebecca feared Mark then. Now she has told the truth. Staging behavior = element of homicide. Merritt's final section. What did Mark do after leaving Old Mill Road? Drove Linda's car to the Platte River bank, left the door ajar, placed the purse on the passenger seat, erased drag marks, created a fake scene of a woman walking away from her car. She paused, voice lowered. This is not the natural reaction of a worried husband. This is deliberate conduct. Under Nebraska law, this is powerful circumstantial evidence of homicide. A younger juror asked, "So we can indict even without a full body?" Merritt nodded. "We have part of a body, and a statement, and forensics, and concealment behavior. This case is stronger than many no-body homicides ever tried." Vote. After more than 4 hours of presentation, Merritt left the room for closed deliberation. No one in the cold case unit knew what was said, but no one doubted the outcome. The evidence was overwhelming. 45 minutes later, the door opened. The foreperson stood. The Hall County Grand Jury votes, true bill. That meant Mark Harwood, age 68, was officially indicted for first-degree murder under Nebraska law, the Linda Harwood case, missing since 1985. 40 years of waiting, one grand jury decision, and finally, Linda Harwood had a voice in a courtroom. The trial of Mark Harwood opened on November 3, 2025, at Hall County District Court. It was not just a trial, it was the moment Nebraska turned to face the darkness of 4 decades earlier. Spectators, press, and even some of the original 1985 investigators packed the gallery, but all attention focused on one thing for the first time in 40 years. The night Linda Harwood vanished would be fully reconstructed with modern technology, before a jury. Prosecutor Jane Merritt began with an ice-cold opening. "We are going to show you, minute by minute, what Mark Harwood did that night." The courtroom lights dimmed. A huge LED screen lit up. A full 3D model of 1985 Grand Island appeared. Streets: St. Francis Hospital, Old Mill Road, the Platte River bank. Fog lighting and vehicle speeds were simulated to real 1985 conditions. Mark's claimed timeline, Merritt said, is on the left side of the screen. A calm blue panel appeared. 9 o'clock, 10:30 p.m., Mark at home. The forensic and Rebecca Walsh timeline, Merritt continued, is on the right. The right screen blazed red, every milestone glowing like needles piercing Mark's lies. 3D model, Linda leaves the hospital, and Mark leaves the house. Merritt showed Linda exiting the hospital back door at 9:14. The simulation captured the yellow sodium lights, the car pulling away. At that exact moment on the other screen, a 3D figure of Mark left the house at 9:30 p.m., with Rebecca. Merritt, this is the minute Mark left the house, while he told police he never left. The jury wrote furiously. Soil plus LiDAR map, Linda's car was driven to Old Mill Road. The screen zoomed to the red clay Old Mill Road area. The 3D model displayed hematite-rich soil, dark red, nothing like Platte River bank dirt. Merritt, this is the soil found under Linda's car. The simulated Pontiac drove into the red zone and stopped. This is where Mark took Rebecca, per her statement. Then the LiDAR burial point appeared. The courtroom went dead silent. No one still believed Linda drove herself to the river, as Mark had claimed 40 years ago. Fiber plus UV fingerprint, Mark in the driver's seat. Next, the 3D interior of the Pontiac Bonneville. Red arrows pointed, Mark's prints on the seat adjustment lever. Seat pushed back for a 6-foot man. Herringbone polyester fiber from Mark's jacket on the passenger seat. Merritt, there is zero evidence Linda ever sat in the driver's seat after 9:20 p.m. There is direct evidence Mark did. Defense counsel objected that the evidence was too old, but the judge overruled. Modern forensics can absolutely recover aged evidence. Proceed. The courtroom was silent. 3D timeline, reconstruction. The 26 minutes Mark vanished from the car. The screen simulated the 26-minute window. Mark left Rebecca alone in the car. The 3D figure did not depict the act itself, per court rules, but showed Mark walking away, then returning with pants covered in the exact mud forensics matched. You see it? Merritt asked. 26 minutes. No one knows where Linda was during this window, except Mark Harwood. Platte River bank, the stage scene. The model shifted to the river. Instead of vague old photos, the simulation showed exactly how the car was placed. No river soil, Merritt pointed to the diagram. No footprints, no natural tire tracks, no forgotten items. Even the fog left no matching condensation pattern on the body. The jury nodded. This was deliberate staging, not an accident, not a voluntary disappearance. This, Merritt concluded, was a stage set. The 9:50 p.m. payphone call enhanced footage that shook the room. Merritt played the cleaned-up VHS clip. The brown-haired woman at the payphone, not Linda. Headlights swept across her face. She yanked the receiver away and fled the frame in 2 seconds. Merritt asked the jury, "Does that behavior look natural to you, or does it look like a signal between Mark and someone helping him?" Defense objected instantly, but the judge allowed it. Merritt was not claiming an accomplice, only asking about behavior. The moment Rebecca Walsh walked into the courtroom and shattered 40 years of silence. The climax of the trial came when Merritt called Rebecca Walsh, 57 years old, hands trembling, but eyes no longer looking away. A packed courtroom held its breath. "Rebecca," Merritt said, "please tell the jury what you saw." Rebecca took a deep breath and began. Her voice shook slightly, but every word, cut like a blade through 40 years of silence. "Mark asked me to be his alibi. I saw him come back with mud on his pants. He told me if I ever told anyone, I would be in trouble. I stayed silent for 40 years. A sob rang out from the back row, Linda's daughter now grown. Defense counsel tried to argue the testimony was unreliable after 4 decades, but Merritt stood, pointed to the forensic screen. Soil matches, fiber matches, fingerprint matches, timeline matches, and Rebecca's words match every minute of the scientific evidence. The trial ended its 6th day, Mark with his head bowed. As the 6th day closed, Mark sat motionless, hands clasped. For the first time since his arrest, he did not look at the jury, did not look at his lawyer, did not look at anyone. He only looked at the floor. As if 40 years of running had collapsed on him in that single moment, Merritt delivered her final line before the court recessed. The night Linda vanished is no longer a mystery. We know who was where, who did what, and why. The case now awaited only the verdict. 40 years after that skin-cutting cold Nebraska night, the night Linda Harwood walked out the back door of St. Francis Hospital and vanished into the fog. The case that seemed forever buried under dust-covered files was finally called by its true name, a premeditated murder, not a mysterious disappearance. And to reach that truth, Nebraska had to combine everything modern technology could offer: forensics data, new testimony, route simulation, LiDAR, geologic analysis, UV fingerprinting, as if the entire 40-year progress of science had been waiting for this one moment. On the day of sentencing, Jane Merritt presented nearly 200 pages of compiled forensics and argument. No complete body, but none is needed. Every scientific trace says the same thing: Linda was murdered. Soil, the dirt that led straight to the killer. Soil forensics, often overlooked in old cases, became the central pillar. It stated clearly, the soil under the car did not come from the Platte River bank, it came from the hematite-rich red clay of Old Mill Road, where Rebecca said Mark took her. The mud on Mark's pants contained the same composition. Only one reasonable conclusion: Linda's car was taken to the river. She did not drive it there. This destroyed the entire story Mark created in 1985. Fiber, the seemingly meaningless thread that made the first cut into the lie, the tiny fiber on the passenger seat, once ignored, turned out to be a critical piece. Gray polyester, herringbone, weave, 1984, perfect match to the Woolridge heavy coat, found in Mark's Flagstaff cabin. Linda owned no men's jacket of that type. The fiber's presence on the passenger seat proved a man had been inside Linda's car that night, and forensics further showed that man was most likely Mark, the owner of that jacket. UV fingerprints, the fingerprints of the crime. 2025, UV imaging turned 1985, faint oil marks into ironclad evidence. Mark's prints appeared on the driver's seat adjustment lever, exactly where only the driver could touch. The seat was pushed back to the length perfect for a 6-foot man, Mark's height. Some prints were at angles impossible for a passenger. These fingerprints told a clearer story than any statement. Mark sat in the driver's seat. Linda was no longer in control of the car. LiDAR plus Sandhills survey, where Linda was actually taken when the LiDAR drone scanned the sandhills and detected a 40-year-old filled grave. The case crossed the point of no return for Mark. In the pit, Linda's necklace. In the pit, her hospital locker, C-17 key. In the pit, bone fragments that matched Linda's DNA. No one buries their own belongings 7 miles from home on an autumn night in 1985, unless they were taken there. No one stages a fake scene at the river, unless the killer wants to mislead. When Mark's old Sandhills map was found in his cabin with an X at the exact LiDAR coordinates, the jury said in closed session, there is nothing left to doubt. Timeline. The truth locked minute by minute, the reconstructed timeline, using 1985 traffic data, vehicle speeds, fog conditions, phone logs, and Rebecca's statement, filled every gap that once made the case unsolvable. Linda leaves hospital 9:14 p.m. Mark calls Rebecca 9:25 p.m. Mark leaves house 9:30 p.m. Mark reaches Old Mill Road, 9:39 p.m. Mark absent 26 minutes, the exact window Linda disappeared. Mark drops Rebecca off and leaves a second time to stage the scene. The 9:50 p.m. payphone call made by a woman who was not Linda. Timeline conclusion. There is not a single minute. Mark is not implicated. Not a single minute Linda remained alive after leaving the hospital without Mark being within 1-2 miles. Rebecca Walsh's testimony, the final piece that unlocked the case. Rebecca Walsh, 17, when it happened, 57 when she told the truth. Mark forced her to provide an alibi. Mark took her to Old Mill Road. When he returned, his pants were covered in mud. Mark told her, "Don't ever talk," and Rebecca stayed silent for 40 years, out of fear, guilt, and manipulation. When her testimony was placed beside the forensics and timeline, they matched perfectly. No one in the courtroom still doubted. Mark controlled, manipulated, erased traces, and killed. Verdict November 21, 2025. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The four-person stood. "We find the defendant guilty. First-degree murder." Mark Harwood showed no strong reaction, no yelling, no pounding the table, no plea for mercy. He only stared down at his slightly trembling hands, the same hands that 40 years earlier had been covered in Nebraska red dirt, that had gripped the Pontiac's wheel, that had staged a fake scene, that had threatened a teenage girl into lifelong silence. Meanwhile, Linda's daughter, now 45, broke down crying. After 40 years, she said, "Finally, my mom has been found." The Nebraska 1985 case became a national case study. Within weeks of the verdict, the FBI, DOJ, and forensic academies across the country began citing it as a landmark no-body homicide. Cases with no full body recovered yet, solved through forensics and data science. Microscopic soil analysis, 40-year-old fiber recovery, high-spectrum UV fingerprinting, 3D reconstruction, drone LiDAR grave detection. 1985, weather data timeline, matching application of forensic of behavior, staging analysis. A Quantico professor said, "The Linda Harwood case proves in the age of modern forensics, killers can no longer hide inside the gaps of time." 40 years of searching, 40 years of pain, 40 years of a secret buried in the Nebraska wind. But in 2025, justice finally spoke for Linda. And with this case, Nebraska left a message for the entire country: no crime truly disappears, only crimes waiting for the right technology and the right people to be seen. When we look back at Nebraska 1985, we are not just retelling a crime, we are shining a light on very real cracks in American life today. Linda was not killed by a stranger in a dark field. She disappeared from what was supposed to be safest: marriage, family, a husband the community trusted. Mark was drowning in debt, secretly taking loans in his wife's forged name, quietly adding life insurance policies, then staging a disappearance at the Platte River bank. It is a reminder that intimate violence and financial crime often walk hand in hand, and when we avoid talking about money, debt, and control inside families, that silence can sometimes become fertile ground for tragedy. Rebecca is another deep cut. A 17-year-old girl dragged into an alibi scheme, threatened that, if you talk, your life is over, and silent for 40 years. Today, when we talk about believe victims or protecting young witnesses, we are not just talking slogans, we are talking about real Rebeccas who need to be believed and protected before it is too late. This story is also a lesson in faith in science and in the persistence of the system. Soil analysis proved Linda never reached the river. Drone LiDAR found the Sandhills grave. UV fingerprints put Mark back in the driver's seat. Behind those cold terms is a very human truth. If files are kept, if there are investigators like Myers, then Dana, who never let go, justice can arrive late, but does not have to be absent. In an America skeptical of so many things, this case reminds us of two truths: never ignore the small warning signs in intimate relationships, and never treat cold cases as just the past. Because with the right technology and the right people, they are doors that can still be opened to truth, and to families who thought they would carry the question, what happened, to their graves. If you believe stories like Nebraska 1985 deserve to be told so we remember that justice, however late, can still arrive, please hit subscribe to walk with us on the next journeys to reclaim the truth. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video, where we will continue opening doors that time thought it had sealed forever on forgotten cases.